This is the Vacation Rental Success Podcast, keeping you up to date with news, views, information and resources on this rapidly changing short-term rental business. I'm your host, Heather Bayer, and with 25 years of experience in this industry, I'm making sure you know what's hot, what's not, what's new, and what will help make your business a success. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Success Podcast. This is your host, Heather Bayer, and as ever, I am super delighted to be back with you once again. And I don't know if you've ever asked yourself whether bigger really is better in the vacation rental business, or why so many large-scale management companies seem to rise fast and fall just as quickly, then this episode is going to be really interesting for you. I'm joined by Ashley Ching, the founder and CEO of InHaven, who just released an insightful report titled A 25-Year History of Hospitality Management, Why Local Wins and National Scale Fails. This is a deep, well-researched case study that charts the downfall of companies like Vacasa and Aimbridge and identifies a repeating cycle of growth through M&A, declining cash flow, rising debt and ultimately financial distress. Ashley's work challenges the narrative we've heard for years that failure is caused by anything from bad CEOs to private equity greed or black swan events. Instead, she argues the real problem is structural. It's rooted in complexity, a lack of local focus, and misguided attempts to scale. And here's what makes this so relevant to you. The report lays out 5 key pillars that successful hospitality operators share. And in this episode, we're going to explore how curating your portfolio, minimizing owner count, that one rings really true for me as a past property manager, reducing product variability and empowering local staff aren't just operational choices, they're strategic imperatives. Ashley also introduces a first-of-its-kind quality framework for our industry, and I know she's been talking about this for some years. And it's one that draws a parallel between hotels and restaurants and now vacation rentals through something as simple but powerful as the ratio of local staff to property. We'll be talking about why choosing 2 out of 3 between service, profitability and scale isn't just a theory, it's a survival strategy. And perhaps most importantly, we'll get Ashley's practical advice on how you, as a host or manager, can build a more resilient, profitable and guest-focused business by embracing a local-first mindset. I first heard Ashley speak at the Vacation Rental Women's Summit a few years ago, and I was blown away by the depth of her knowledge, not just in vacation rentals, but in the broader hospitality space. I learned so much from her in that session, and I'm glad she's now here to share more of her wisdom with my audience. Lots to unpack in this one, so settle in and let's jump into this important conversation with Ashley Ching. So I'm so happy to have back with me on the podcast once again, Ashley Ching from InHaven. Hi, Ashley. It's super to have you back with me.
Hi, Heather. Thanks so much for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Well, I had you on last just after was it the last Vacation Rental Women's Summit?
Yes, probably. That's right.
Yes, because it was the first time I heard you speak, and you were talking about hotels, and I think I went along. I thought, really, and I've been in hospitality for a long time, but vacation rental hospitality, and I thought, so really, what does hotels have to tell us?
Right.
And you told us what hotels have to tell us, and I learned so much in that 40-minute presentation, and I grabbed you after and I said, you've got to come on the podcast to talk about that, and you did, and that was such a great introduction, I think, for people to understand that we're not so different from these other hospitality models. So thank you for that. I heard about the company called Aimbridge, and I heard about property management in hotels. Never knew about that. So if anybody's intrigued about this, I will put a link to the last episode I did with Ashley, because we're not going to talk about that today, not in great detail anyway. But if you want to know about all those relationships, then it's really worthwhile going back and listening to that last episode we did 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago. So you've just come back from Vacation Rental Women's Summit again?
Oh, it was incredible.
Don't tell me. I have
I
so
know.
much FOMO.
Yes, you should. It was Amy Hinout runs just an incredible show. The content was amazing. The women that gathered were all incredible leaders. It was just a great conference. I encourage anyone to attend her conferences. The networking alone is just fantastic. So
Well,
it's a not to miss event. Yes.
yeah, that's the first one I have. I think this was the fourth, and I've been to the previous three. I didn't go to this one because of family and all sorts of other things happening because it was in August and whatever. I won't miss it again.
Yes.
But we're here today to talk about the report, which you've called A 25-Year History of Hospitality Management, Why Local Wins and National Scale Fails. And I was just, when I saw you post this on LinkedIn, and I immediately went in and downloaded it, because I thought, Ashley always delivers the best. And you didn't let me down with this report.
There's a lot in there.
There's a mass of stuff in there. You've got, how many people did you talk to?
Oh, we had over 1,000 interviews.
Wow.
It was an insane amount of people. We spoke to executives across the hotel, restaurant, and vacation rental industry. We spoke to national players. We spoke to locals. We spoke to all the executives, operators, bankers. I mean, the list goes on and on. Really trying to understand, what makes for successful hospitality management and why we've seen failures as of late and over the last 25 years in national hospitality management. So it was fascinating, the interviews, and the findings were even more fascinating.
Well, we're going to get into this now, and at the end, you come up with some really tangible things that people in this industry can do.
Yes.
So we're going to get to that. But the report opens with something that's really almost still topical, and that's Vacasa's rise and fall. Why did you choose to use Vacasa in this way?
Well, first of all, Vacasa is an incredible company to study. I mean, it reached its peak valuation at $4.5 billion upon completing its de-SPAC in December 2021. And then 3 years later, it was running out of cash at a market cap of only $128 million. It was down 97%. And it announced its proposed distress sale to the Casago consortium. And, we talk about, we in the study, we say that Vacasa served as really a bookend to its rise and fall. But in reality, it was really the opening chapter for our case study into hospitality management. We work with hundreds of property managers in the US, and a lot of them were asking what led to Vacasa's failure. And they asked, what does this mean for the health of the vacation rental industry? And what are some of the lessons that we can learn to avoid these similar pitfalls? And so that's really kind of how we started to really look into Vacasa, and where we saw that they followed these 5 key distinct phases. And you can, and for anyone listening, they can look at, page, I think it's like around page 10, where we kind of talk through these 5 distinct key phases, because they started out just with one property in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
And they went through these incredible distinct phases.
I remember, years ago, going to a Verma conference, and it wasn't that long after Vacasa came on the scene. And they brought everybody to the conference, and almost everybody you came across, you'd look at their badge and it said Vacasa on it. It's like, who are these people?
I've talked to property managers that said, we got really nervous. We just kept hearing their name pop up. What are they doing right? What are we not doing right? So, it was really interesting. And, the beginning of their story was, for the first couple of years, they just grew organically. But I think they started to make the news as they started to take on investments to do these private equity-backed deals. They eventually rose to about 44,000 homes before owner churn really set in. And eventually they announced their distress sale. So they learned a lot. And what was really interesting is just 3 weeks after Vacasa announced its distress sale to the Casago consortium, Aimbridge Hospitality, who is the largest hotel property manager, they manage about 1,500 hotels, announced its out-of-court bankruptcy restructuring. And so we thought, wow, that's crazy. The 2 largest property managers, one in the vacation rental space, one in the hotel space, they're both, in financial distress. Is this a coincidence? When we went back and studied Aimbridge, they too went on this same distinct corporate journey and these 5 distinct phases that Vacasa went on around the same time period. And we're like, wow, you just can't even make this up. This is crazy.
So what were these? What are these 5 phases?
Yeah, so phase 1 is really organic growth. They started organically. Both Aimbridge and Vacasa grew organically for their first couple of years. And then they both went into phase 2, which was private equity M&A back deals. And so in the example of Vacasa...
Can I just stop you there for a minute? Because
yes.
Could you just explain what you mean by private equity M&A deal for anybody who doesn't really understand?
So they basically went out to these private equity companies and they raised capital from them to then go out and buy companies. Mm-hmm. So Vacasa raised $144 million to fund about 90 different acquisitions between 2016 and 2018. So they grew their property base from just under 2,300 properties to almost 11,000 in that time period. So really considerable growth. And at the same time, Aimbridge did the same. They raised a bunch of money, and over a 3-year period of time, they bought a bunch of different hotel management companies. And so they grew from 77 hotels to 800 by 2018. So really significant significant growth in this private equity back deal time period. Then they moved into the third time period, which we call the large M&A. It's sort of where they went whale hunting and they raised a ton of money. So in Vacasa's instance, they raised $427 million of capital to buy Wyndham, mm-hmm. North America, and to buy Turnkey. And so they went from just under 11,000 units during that time to their peak at 44,000 units. And same with Aimbridge. They raised, a bunch of money to go out and buy their number 2 competitor, Advent International. So they went from, just under 800 hotels in 2018 to 1,500. And then they both experienced churn in the 4th phase. The owners weren't getting their needs fulfilled. They just took on too much. Their teams couldn't handle it. And that led to the 5th phase of their distressed sales. And so it was really fascinating following. They followed the same exact time periods. And in the study, we lined them up so you can see them go through these 5 distinct phases around the same time. And so, we left that thinking, gosh, is this just an isolated event? Is this just a coincidence? And so that's what really took us on this journey of looking back the past 25 years, where we continue to see different eras of these national property management companies, both in the hotel and the vacation rental space, failing over and over again.
You also include restaurants in this report.
And we included restaurants. We did. So we looked at restaurants because, again, there's a lot to learn in the restaurant space. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, just about quality frameworks and how they manage and how local really does win in the restaurant space. So essentially, when you think about property management, you want the local teams that know where to source, how to hire, how to deliver that best guest experience. And it's really, it doesn't matter what service industry you're in, whether you're in restaurants, hotels, or vacation rentals. We just found over and over again in our interviews that local wins. So
tell me what you mean by local wins. Can you, what gives locally operated hospitality that edge? Because I remember a story I've told before, remembering being down in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and being in a dollar store. And I'm picking something up for the dog in the dollar store, dog toy. And in front of me, in the checkout line, was this lady with this, she had a cart and it was absolutely piled high. But she had 3 of everything, and everything was the cheapest, the actual dollar from the dollar store. Yes. So all the kitchen utensils and bowls and plastic mugs and glasses. And just before she checked, and I thought, oh gosh, this is for a vacation rental. And she turned around and she had a Vacasa badge on. Mm-hmm. And I thought that is not what the local local property management companies that I know of in that area would not be seen doing that. Right. And I think because there's an element of really not caring in that type of behavior. Yes. So that just came to mind when you said locally operated hospitality, because from my experience of companies that operate themselves, they're in the areas, they live, eat and breathe it. they deliver a different experience.
Exactly. And that's the key point, is they deliver a different experience. One of the favorite quotes I took away from this study is from J.W. Bill Marriott, who ran Marriott for 40 years before stepping down in 2012. And one of his keys to hospitality leadership was inviting his colleagues to share just divergent perspectives and to be a part of the decision-making process. And he said, the four most important words in the English language are, what do you think? Listen to your people. And so this was really the founding principle for this case study. We conducted all of these interviews and we asked all these people, what do you think? What makes hospitality management companies successful or a failure? And all of those learnings are summarized in our 5 pillars of hospitality management. But we profile how the successful local management companies we met with really embrace these 5 key pillars. And it's easier to do locally than on the national basis. And we found that the national companies not only did not embrace these pillars, but actually rejected them through their operating approaches. So, it's really important, and we'll go into the 5 key pillars, just to have locally empowered employees and to be, have operations that are centered around the local operations and whatnot. And so it's very interesting I think the point here is that you need to ask your local teams, what do you think? What needs to happen? They know best. And those companies that do that really do succeed, and those that don't fail.
So why were the Vacasa business units not doing this, or why were they not operating in the way that other locally owned and operated businesses were? What was missing?
Well, I think a lot was missing. I think that when we talk about these 5 pillars, you kind of need to have all of them in place to create a sturdy building, right? Only 4 in place, your building's not as sturdy for the 5 key pillars. But, one of the examples is empowering locals. When hospitality professionals have a certain gene, right? They want to make their owners and their guests very happy, right? They wake up every day thinking, how can they improve their experience? And when these larger companies took over, no longer are they going to their GM saying, can I do this? They're calling Portland or Dallas, Texas to get approvals. And they're hearing, well, that's not how we do it at Vacasa, or that's not how we do things at Aimbridge. And so we saw just huge brain drain, because these local professionals, if they don't feel empowered at Vacasa or Aimbridge or some other larger national, they'll just leave and they'll go to a local company. And so, I think it's really about creating that local experience and empowering your local employees. And that's what, one of the big misses to Vacasa and Aimbridge. Another miss was, one of the most interesting things we heard through our interviews, and something that I don't think has been studied as much or written about as much, is really making sure that you're limiting the number of owners. And, how many owners can you take on at one point? And in the hotel industry, as we studied this, we see that really 300 owners is the max. We haven't seen a successful company take on more than 300 different owners. What is that number for the vacation rental space? We don't know, but the number of owners really pulls you in so many different directions. And we think about business strategy. We think about how can we remove the constraints and improve throughput? Well, the more owners you take on, the more constraints you face, and it just makes for a more complex business. So that was a really interesting finding there.
So just go through the 5 pillars. I think you've covered a couple of them, but let's go through them one by one.
Yeah. So the first pillar is really a curated portfolio. So it's, we saw that most of the successful companies that we profiled were super choosy on the properties they take on. So, for example, Panda Express is a great restaurant company that we studied. Their whole executive team travels to every single location. As they take on a new location, they'll run a whole pro forma to make sure that every standalone unit can be profitable on its own. And they will pay a higher expense to get the best location. But if they don't get that specific location in that food court that they want, they walk. And so they're very picky about those units that they take on. On the flip side, when you grow through M&A, you're taking on a lot of bad apples potentially. And so obviously you're always going to have your bottom 10%, but it's when your bottom 10% grows to 20%, 30% that you're getting yourself into a lot of trouble. Your teams are having to travel to all these locations to deal with these locations. And so it causes a lot of distraction and can eventually lead to failure. So that's the first thing, is just, it's really important to maintain a curated portfolio. The second key pillar to successful hospitality management was taking on properties with similar demand drivers. So when we think about demand drivers in the vacation rental industry, I think a lot about abode luxury rentals out in Park City. So they manage about 200 properties in Park City, and they have an office in Park City, Sun Valley, and Jackson Hole. So all of these are destination mountain towns, ski towns, and they're all luxury rentals. And so they are servicing a very similar guest, and they're dealing with a very similar owner. And so they're limiting their number of demand drivers there. It's when, in the Aimbridge, as they took on all these units, they were managing anywhere from economy to luxury hotels. They were in urban cities, suburban, resort destinations. They had all these different demand drivers. And so that's when it becomes very complex and hard to manage.
I remember that in our area of Ontario, there are a vast range of, we all dealt with waterfront properties. So every property management company had primarily 90% would be properties with private waterfront. Mm-hmm. That was our uniqueness, right. But it wasn't really a uniqueness because that's all we have, just these waterfront properties. But when we started, we went for anything and everything, just bring them on. And it wasn't very long after that when we realised, when talking about curation, that we had to drop that bottom as it was getting up to 20%. And we did a massive cull about 4 or 5 years in and dropped half our inventory. That was challenging, but it made a massive difference. And then along came, I think, I don't know if you've met Jane from Jane's Luxury Rentals in Muskoka.
No, I have not, but I've heard about her.
Yes, Jane specialises in the very high end, the 10, 15 bedroom mansions on these lakes, which are owned by a lot of celebrities are out there owning and renting out their places. Mm-hmm. But that's her key area. She's carved her niche in that, and she does not take on anything else. Because we used to get the calls from Jane saying, "Oh, I've got a client that's come to me, or a prospective client. It's not the sort of property that we would take on because it was maybe a smaller one, didn't have all the luxury features." But she was very clear on what she will take on, and therefore her reputation is solid, absolutely solid. This is what I do, and I don't compromise on anything. So I really understand that.
And someone, when we were talking, they said, well, what if I'm, in, let's call it like Orange Beach, Alabama, and I've got economy level stays and I've got luxury. Okay, well, the luxury guests expect concierge level services. So you just have to staff up your team because your team, the experience that you're providing that guest and owner for the economy level home is very different than the luxury. And so you need to make sure that you're, staffing appropriately, and it becomes more complex in that situation.
Yeah, we're going to come on to that when we talk about this staff to property ratio. Yes, but let's go on to the other three pillars.
The third pillar is limiting the number of owners, which I've already talked about. But, a great example of limiting number of owners is a company called the Pappas Restaurants. And they primarily operate in Texas and the Midwest of America. But they own and manage all of their restaurants. And so an example here is they got feedback, they're based in Houston, and they got feedback that 15 of their Dallas locations, guest reviews were that the bathrooms were substandard. And so that weekend, the entire executive team traveled to Dallas and confirmed that, yes, they weren't living up to their standards. And so on Monday, they replaced all of the general managers in Dallas and promoted the assistant general managers, sending a very clear message to the team saying that we have standards, and if you are not going to live up to that, we will make changes. And so this can be done because they own and manage all of their restaurants, right? It takes, when you have 10,000, 12,000 units to make changes, it takes time. You have to get all your owners on board. So really, we talk about that's a critical factor is limiting the number of owners that you take on. The fourth key pillar is local oriented operations. And so really just making sure that you are adhering to the local needs of your local market. We spoke to one property manager that was acquired by a larger company, and he said that we do pre-arrival inspections. And this larger company said, well, that's not how we do things at the global level. And he knew that would hurt them, and that would hurt, that would cause guest frustration and owner churn. And so he ended up leaving. So, really making sure that you've got local oriented operations, that you're really helping to differentiate yourself locally through, those key competitive differentiators. And then the fifth was empowering local hospitality professionals, making sure that your local teams feel empowered. If they don't, they will leave. And there will be massive brain drain, and you'll be left with the worst employees. So those are the five key pillars. And I think, one of the things, I think any hospitality company can be successful if they maintain these five key pillars. I think one of the biggest misnomers in our industry in general is that bigger is better. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked a little bit about economies of scale, and we truly believe that in hospitality or service related industry, as you scale, you actually get diseconomies of scale, not economies of scale.
So can elaborate on that?
Yeah. So for economies of scale, you should see labor efficiencies, right, as you scale. And so our example here where you do see labor efficiencies is a company called Ball Corp. They make all of the aluminum cans pretty much worldwide. So they make the aluminum cans that you drink when you're drinking a Coca-Cola or a beer. And they have one production line, just one production line can produce up to 1 billion cans a year. And it takes only 18 people to operate. They've got 6 people running an 8-hour shift, and they've got 3 shifts a day. So whether you produce 100,000 cans or 1 billion, you just need 18 people, right? And so it's a very simple cost structure when it comes to labor. On the flip side, when we look at like service-oriented industries, I think a lot about managing a school, which I know isn't vacation rentals, but I think people can relate, especially those with young children. A great example is the Forney Independent School, which is about 20 miles west of Dallas. And they're one of the fastest growing schools in the country. They have doubled their student population. They had 8,500 students back in 2013, and now they're at 18,500 in 2025.
That's
so it's crazy.
18,000 right? Students in a school. This is not
in a school. Yes. And so their compound annual growth rate is about 6.7%. But also, right, you have to maintain those student to teacher ratios, right? So the staff numbers at the school district have risen from about just under 1,000 in 2013 to 2,500 today. And so they're growing at an even faster rate at 8.4%, a compound annual growth rate. And this is because in hospitality and service oriented businesses, as you scale, you need to add more people. Right? It becomes more complex. As the school grows, you need to, maintain that student to teacher ratio that I talked about, the 1 to 20. But then they have to add more PE teachers. They have to add art teachers and music. They need to invest in their special needs program. They need more counselors and administrators, right? So as you scale, you actually need more people. And so this is where you actually get diseconomies of scale in these service-oriented industries versus economies of scale. So that's one of the things that we talk about in terms of just the diseconomies of scale. The second area is in bulk purchasing. So in Ball Corp, back to the aluminum can company, 55% of their costs are in materials. So aluminum and other materials. So when they go and negotiate better deals on aluminum, that really impacts their bottom line. On the vacation rental industry is on the flip side, or the hotel industry, on average, 55% of your costs are on labor. And as you get bigger, you need to pay higher wages, right? People expect more. They expect better benefits. And they're exposed to organized labor. So that creates more costs. So you really don't get those bulk purchasing efficiencies that you get, or just the impact of bulk purchasing on service industries that you see in other industries like Ball.
So how does, I can't do a single episode without bringing the word AI into it. So how does what's the impact of AI and automation when you're talking about this type of scaling? Because you hear a lot about, we can take people out because we can automate things like guest responses and other operational things that people used to have to do, and now there is an AI tool for that. Did you cover that at all?
Not in this one, but in another study that we've done. So we can look at the airline industry. They have invested hugely in AI and technology. So in terms of apps and whatnot. And what's interesting is people pay for service. People pay for people. And over the last 20 years, we've seen airfares down significantly with the more technology introduced. People just will not pay up for having to use an app or having to use a kiosk to check in. We're seeing this in the economy level hotels. Over the last 20 years, ADRs have dropped about 10% because people just won't pay for technology as a service. It's interesting. On the flip side, the high-end luxury hotels have only invested in more people, right? They've got wellness centers. They've got, you can't even literally get into the hotel and you can't even push your own elevator button, right? They want to, service comes from people. And that's where you can charge higher ADRs. And on the luxury side, we've seen ADRs just continue to increase. So I think AI, it's a balance. I think, using it back of house or whatnot, but once it starts to enter into the guest experience, that's we've only seen with the airline and these luxury hotel industries, ADRs dropping quite significantly.
Oh, that's interesting. So the report doesn't cover just the large scale. You've talked about Vacasa and Aimbridge. What about small ones as well? Because a lot of our listeners here are small property managers. They're not in that realm of a Vacasa. They're not at risk of going there, whether it's intentionally or not. Are they in danger of falling into these traps, even when they're this small?
No, you're not. And I think as long as you follow those key 5 pillars of hospitality, and as long as you're really curating your portfolio, you're limiting the number of owners, your operations are very local oriented, you've empowered your employees, and you're looking at properties with similar demand drivers, you can be successful on a local level. I talk a lot about Abode because I just think their operations are amazing, Rachel and Rob. They're local. They live within 30 miles of every single property in their Park City area. And they've really been very intentional of keeping their business small, but they've grown a significant business with just 200 homes. And they've really followed each of these pillars and not growing through M&A, growing organically, keeping a very portfolio with similar demand drivers, et cetera.
Yeah, you see the same with Moving Mountains and
absolutely.
Robin Cragen, Mountain Laurel Chalets and Tom Goodwin. Same
amazing
model.
operators. And I'll be at Moving Mountains next week. I'm so excited to visit them. They're just such an incredible team. But yes, both Tom and Robin run companies that are just so thoughtful. And they really, they were, we spoke extensively to Robin and Heather on this case study. They also really upheld these 5 key pillars.
So this episode is brought to you in part by the Straight Chat community, the online gathering place for short-term rental professionals who want more than surface-level advice. We've created this community for those people who want to explore new tools, to talk about the real challenges they're having, and to connect with others who get it. Straight Chat's where those meaningful conversations are happening, and we're sharing news and innovations and new tools and anything you want to know, along with office hours each week and regular tutorials. And along with that, if you've been seriously curious about AI, about how to use it for guest messaging or workflows, setting up standard operating procedures or even marketing, check out the AI Ambassador Program. It's designed for short-term rental professionals who want to lead the way with smart, ethical AI adoption. You don't need to be a tech expert. You just need curiosity and a desire to stay ahead of the curve and to lead the way in your company. Visit vacationrentalformula.com/AI to learn more and to join us. Okay, let's talk about, because this is what I was really interested in. You introduced the idea that companies can only focus on they need to focus on 2 out of 3 things. And that's service, scale, and profitability. Why? Why is it so important? And can you do 2 of them and miss out on one? Can you actually be successful with scale and profitability?
I think it's really just you have to pick your 2.
Yeah.
You have to pick two of the three. You can't be successful at all three. We haven't seen anyone do it. And so we give examples in the case study of really making sure that you're picking two, whether it be scale, whether it be profitability, whether it be service. We haven't seen anyone do it successfully. So it's choosing the two that make the most sense for your business. Yeah. I think a lot about childcare. When we were hiring our nanny, we've got 4 young kids, and we were hiring a nanny. I remember my mother-in-law said to me once, she said, so when you think about hiring someone to take care of your kids, they could either be good at childcare, cooking, or cleaning, and they can be good at 2 of them, but not all 3. And that's the same concept of this. You have to pick. You can't have all 3. And so we profiled different companies in our case study that have been successful of the two of the 3 in choosing.
Yeah, it's when I sort of got stuck on this. If I'm great at scale and profitability, how am I going to succeed without the service side of it?
Service, again, I mean, service is service can be very complex as well. So we just haven't seen anyone that's scaled and profitable really.
Right. Now I see it. Right. Yes, that's all come clear now.
Yeah. So there's a company called American Homes for Rent, and they are a home rental company. They work with mid and long-term rentals and single-family homes, and they've got 60,000 properties under management. They own everything and manage everything. They have been great at scale, and they're extremely profitable, but they provide very limited service, right? Just they're really only there if your water heater breaks. And so that's a company that has been very successful with scale and profitability, but no one expects a lot of service from them.
All right. Oh, that's a really interesting. So what would you tell people who are thinking, okay, which 2 should I choose?
Balance is the key to life. It's really up to them. I mean, they really have to figure out what's best for their business and what kind of company they want to.
Yeah.
What are their key? What are they trying to achieve? We just heard over and over again. There's 3 things you can achieve, but you can only get. Sorry, there's 3 components, but you can only achieve 2. So you've got to pick your 2 wisely.
Yeah, I think most people would go for the service. I mean, certainly, amongst the small companies, they'll go for service. And now I sort of see it, because if they're going to go for service and scale,
then they're in the shoes of Vacasa.
Yeah,
because you cannot be profitable with service and scale.
Right.
Or we haven't seen it yet.
Oh, that's this all really comes back down to this being focused locally and being down there in the communities. And we've talked about, the Robin Cragans and the Tom Goodwins and
Rachel,
the old days. Valerie Gangas is another one who are creating these just amazing companies. So it is possible, but they're all doing the same thing. Very, very locally focused, curated well. They've hitting all those 5 pillars.
I just spent a day with Val's team in Union Pier, Michigan last week. And again, that team knows every single property in and out, right? They know how to service them. We were talking about their owners and their guests. I mean, they are just so local. They know all the best places to go. They've got these guides. I mean, they're just, and she's really empowered her team locally. It's really an incredible business to study, Juniper.
Yeah, hiring is an issue as well. Did you cover hiring at all?
I think it's just, we didn't get into it too much in this case study, but I think it's really important as you think about hiring to hire, and this is for my own business too. Yeah. I think we are in a service industry, and hiring people with that hospitality gene is just critical to your success. So, and I know it can really, especially in these very remote places, it can be a challenge. But just making sure that people have the service industry. So when I think about hiring for my own team, I think, have you worked in a restaurant before? Have you worked in a hotel? Having that service gene is really important.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk to, I talk to so many people on the podcast, and that first question I ask is, how did you get into this industry? And so many of them, they started out helping out mum and dad in a bed and breakfast or a guest house, or they worked in a restaurant. Valerie's story, of course, is rooted in a restaurant. That's how she started out. And yeah, so I hadn't really thought about that. And I think that that whole you mentioned the hospitality gene, and that is just so important.
So important. I mean, that's why we're here. We're here to deliver on great owner and guest experiences. And it's important to find people with that gene to be successful.
So you interviewed a lot of people, 1,000 interviews. Did you come across any, anything that really surprised you or that was insightful that might have changed your view while you were going through this process?
Honestly, the most surprising, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the most surprising finding was, because I just don't think it's written about a lot in hospitality management literature, is limiting the importance of limiting the number of owners. I had not thought about that as we were going into it. And we heard it over and over again with what makes successful hospitality management. And so I think, I would love to have that number for the vacation rental industry. I don't, but I think that was the most surprising finding, or just something I hadn't thought about or considered as we were going into these interviews.
I mean, certainly as I was a property manager for 20 years, it took us quite a while to realize that when we took a new property on, it wasn't the property that was important. It was the owner.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when we figured that out after a lot of mistakes, then we altered our way of onboarding and selecting. And then it comes down to the curation of properties. You're curating the owners as well as the properties. Because, I can't think of the amount of times that we had those difficult conversations with owners because they were just difficult.
Right. Yeah, totally. I think the other thing, that was interesting is I think there's a media narrative out there on why national management has failed, and people kept trying to point fingers to the CEO, private equity, to exogenous events like 9/11 or the financial crisis. And what was interesting as we really started to talk to these executives and really kind of peel back the onion, it actually wasn't, obviously, yes, there's components of it that, that people have to take responsibility and private equity can sometimes lead you in the wrong direction. But at the end of the day, there were real structural issues there. And so that's where we started to build these 5 key pillars, because these 5 key pillars weren't in place with these national property managers. So I think it was interesting during the interviews, they all kind of either went to, well, it was the CEO. We're like, well, but there were 15 of them and 15 different executive teams. It can't just be the CEO. Or they would say, oh, it's private equity. And we're like, well, there's failures on the public side too. Or they'd say it's exogenous events, but we got many examples of companies who have thrived through these events. So it was really interesting kind of peeling back the onion with them and getting to really the real structural issues that occurred with these failures.
So if you were giving advice to property managers who are listening to this, what recommendations would you give to them based on the lessons that you've learned from the report?
So for sure, as we just mentioned, stick close to those 5 key pillars. Really look at your business and making sure that you're upholding those. We just haven't seen anyone be successful that haven't really maintained those 5 key pillars. And as I mentioned earlier, you can't have a sturdy building with 4 of them, right? They really all are required. I think another one, and we can talk about this next, is really using our quality framework to align your business operations to what you're offering your guests. So we've developed a whole quality framework for the vacation rental industry, as there are in the hotel and restaurant industries, and really thinking about sort of what type of service and quality you're delivering, where you want to be delivering, and are you doing that today? I think it's the third is just recognizing the balance between complexity and scale. How complex your business is can, if your business is very complex, and we've got a whole complexity rubric in the case study. If your business is very complex, it's going to be very hard to scale. And then the fourth is just, again, going back to, service, scale, and hospitality. It's finding the right balance and orienting your business towards 2 of those 3 based on what you want to achieve.
So let's go back to the quality framework, because, you, ever since I've known you, the standards and quality and this framework have been sort of a cornerstone of everything you do. So, So explain that.
Yeah. So basically every hospitality industry hotels, restaurants, airlines, rental cars work on a tiered quality framework. And so if you look at hotels, their quality framework is economy, mid-scale, upscale, luxury. In the food and restaurant industry, it's fast food, casual, premium, and then fine dining. And so guests don't always want to stay at luxury, right? They don't always, when I travel, I don't always stay at a luxury hotel. And in fact, 3% of hotels in the US are luxury. Over 50% are mid-scale and upscale. So a majority of the hotel stays in the US are in that range. And so when you look at what makes something an economy level tier to a luxury tier, we started to really break that down. And we said, well, maybe it's location. And then we said, really, well, it's not location. In South Beach, Miami, you've got a Ritz-Carlton and you have a Hampton Inn. Mm-hmm. Right? So it can't be location. And then we thought, well, maybe it's quality. Well, it's not fully quality. If you've been to Singapore, I highly recommend you stop by this Michelin star hawker stall called Hill Street Tai Wah Pork Noodle. They make the best noodle soup I've ever tasted. It's a $7 bowl of noodles, and it's served with plastic cutlery and a paper bowl, mm-hmm. right? But they're Michelin star, so it can't just be quality. So if it's not location and quality, what really differentiates between a economy hotel and a luxury hotel, or a fast food restaurant and a fine dining restaurant? And it really boils down to service. And so, we looked at the difference of, okay, let's look at in the hotel space, at a Motel 6, when you check in, there's one person there, mm-hmm. give you your key and get you checked in. Versus if you check into a Ritz-Carlton, there's 10 people in the lobby. There's people to open the door for you, bellhops to take your luggage, a concierge, front desk, people pushing the elevator buttons for you, right? They are just there ready to serve you at any needs. They're just wandering, looking for people that are lost or confused. And so that really, a Motel 6 can't buy Ritz-Carlton sheets and put a label on the hotel calling it a Ritz-Carlton, right? It's all about service. And that's what we found the same as to be in the restaurant industry. So if in fast food, if you go to McDonald's, there's one person front of house to give you your meal. You're actually ordering off of a kiosk. Yeah. So you don't even really talk to anyone. Versus 11 Madison Park, which, was featured in Unreasonable Hospitality, the world's best restaurant in 2017. There are up to 8 service people mm-hmm. servicing just a table of diners, right? You've got a host, a waiter, a head waiter, a beverage director, a dream weaver. You've got just tons of people there. And so what we've decided, we're on a mission at In Haven, really to work with our professional property managers to introduce that first quality framework for the vacation rental industry. And so it's not only based on just the furnishings. So when we think about furnishings, we think of the comfort of the stay, the sleep, bathing, and eating experience, but also based on the service levels. And that's where we've introduced this people to property ratio. And so we have 4 tiers at In Haven, just like every other service industry. We have signature, premium, lifestyle, and essential as our 4 tiers. And we believe strongly that both the property managers and guests will benefit from this transparent framework.
I love that. Tell us a bit more about In Haven.
Yeah, so we work, with professional property managers that, we tend to work more with people based in resort destinations. And we help property managers set standards for things that can be repeated across their portfolio of homes. So the sleeping experience, so the bedding, bathing experience, the towels, the shampoos, et cetera, and then the fully stocked kitchen. And so we help them standardize this. We have inventory management tools to help them maintain their inventory levels. We're connected to a bunch of different PMS softwares to automate the invoicing. And then we are launching this fall a booking site where we help our property managers promote those standards to their guests and really, differentiate their offering versus your kind of single host in the area.
That's fantastic. And I know from the conversations we've had, how dear all this talk of quality and standards is to your heart. And I know how much you share it.
Yeah.
Okay, so for anybody who wants to see this report, how can they get hold of it, Ashley?
Okay, so they can email me, ashley@inhaven.com, or they can go to our site, inhaven.com/case-study, and download it for free. And I can put it in the show notes as well. It's over 100 pages, but the executive summary, I think, is just over 10 pages. So you can get a lot of just reading the first couple of pages of the study.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great graphics in there. lots to read. I've pulled it up half a dozen times over the past, week or so since I downloaded it, and still getting more out of it. So I will probably drag a couple more podcast episodes out of it. Talk to different
there's
people.
So much content. There is.
Well, it was interesting you talked about luxury, because there was a LinkedIn post, and I can't remember who did it, and I know you commented on it in the last couple of days.
It was from Rafat at Skiff.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
Yes.
So do you recall? I just remember it being about. It was a little bit of a rant about luxury and why everybody's aiming for this word, and what does it actually mean anyway? What
does it actually mean? And I think it's important to know that it represents such a small segment of our travel these days. I mean, and all of us, we travel across that chain scale. We I often stay in a Holiday Inn Express when I'm on the road to my son's soccer game, or I might stay in a mid-scale hotel as I go to these vacation rental conferences, or a luxury hotel with my husband for our 25-year anniversary. So there's just different needs, and not everyone's looking for the same type of stay, but those quality frameworks in the other industries are super helpful. So you know what you're going to get, and you know what you're paying for.
Okay, what do you give a final word to our listeners on where they can go from here? If they've been excited by this episode, what's one thing that you'd suggest they do right now?
Please pick up a copy of the case study. I think that there's so much that we didn't discuss today that I think they could find to be interesting or helpful in their own business. And look out for, we'll be doing some webinars with some of our property managers in the future, talking to them how they institute these pillars and some of the frameworks in the case study.
That's fantastic. Everything will be in the show notes. Ashley, thank you so much.
Heather, thank you.
It's always an absolute pleasure. I hope I get to see you. I'll be in Las Vegas for
I'll be there
the
too.
Conference. I will see you there.
Great. Thank you, Heather. And thanks for all you do for our industry.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining me and sharing all that wisdom. There's so much in that report, 100 pages, I think, but it really comes down to these 5 key pillars. And I wish I'd known this years and years ago. It took us a long time to actually get there. I mean, we were there by the time I'd sold. We were curating, we were limiting owners, we were doing all these things and staying very local and, capitalizing on local knowledge of our staff. So we were doing that stuff, but it took us around 15, 16 years to do it. Whereas with this information that's come out of this report, anybody can do it really, relatively quickly. You can begin to. You don't have to take years to learn about these things. It's all there. You can read, learn, apply. So, I learned that always such a pleasure to talk to Ashley, whether it's in the female founders group that she put together, or whether it's on a podcast or just networking at a conference. It is just such a pleasure to have time with her. So, definitely go to the show notes and I'll have a link to the report there. Or you can reach out to Ashley and chat to her as you wish. But I definitely recommend that you do that. So that's it for another week. It's, as ever, a pleasure to sit here in my little basement studio and talk to you and know that hopefully we are bringing you some really valuable information that you can take back and apply in your business. That makes me feel good. If you'd like to tell me about that and how you've applied it and what's worked for you, please do. Send me an email at heather@vacationrentalformula.com. I would love to hear from you. And of course, if you are so inclined, I'd also love a review on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts on. The more reviews we get, particularly if they're 5-star, because we all love 5-star reviews, then the more people come and listen to the podcast. And that's always good for everybody. Okay, thank you for being with me. I'll be with you again next week. It's been a pleasure as ever being with you. If there's anything you'd like to comment on, then join the conversation on the show notes for the episode at vacationrentalformula.com. We'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to being with you again next week.